Hey guys, we are in the basement. Today we're going to do another tech video, and we're filming this on Christmas Eve 2012. I hope you guys are having a great holiday season so far. You can see the basement down here is in a festive mood. I hope you are too. But anyway, actually, you know what? Speaking of Christmas, let me show you guys this over here. Over at klov.com, klov.com, which is the killer list of video games. It's a forum that I hang out at a lot. And we did a Secret Santa thing over there. And so my Secret Santa, you can see here, he sent me these really cool custom pint glasses. And they say John's Arcade on them. And it's like screen printed, kind of like a white, almost like an etched color on here. So one side says John's Arcade. The other side on this one has Mario, and then on the second glass we've got one side with Luigi, and the other side says John's Arcade. Pretty cool, huh? I definitely want to thank my Secret Santa over at klov.com because these are pretty badass, and he also sent me this kind of retro cool Donkey Kong clock. Check that out. It looks like it's vintage retro and like a bitchin' Mario throw blanket. And also, while we're talking about this, let me show you this here. My buddy Scoots, I come home from work the other day, and there's a package sitting on my counter, and inside of it are these cool custom John's Arcade coasters. They're like made out of stone and ceramic. Like really heavy duty stuff. So Scoots, man, thanks for making this. It was an awesome surprise. I love them. So yeah, John's Arcade coasters. So anyway, there you guys go. Hope you're having a great holiday. Definitely am over here. So, all right, guys, let's talk about what we're going to talk about today, and that is pole position. Now, pole position is one of my favorite games of all time. However, it is a problematic game. My friend Starfighter actually sent me a message not too long ago saying, "Hey John, could you please do a video showing how you did the voltage mods on pole position and how you bulletproofed," I use that phrase lightly, but bulletproofed the game. So there is kind of a well-known voltage mod for this. You see, the problem with pole position, well, besides the PCB having a lot of custom chips that aren't easily replaced, one of the big problems is power. Getting good power to the board. You see, this game has two AR2 power supplies in it. Each power supply is supplying one of the two boards in the stack. What happens is the edge connector starts getting flaky or loose. You know, it's just not making a good contact with the PCB. The voltage starts dropping off as a result. The AR2 senses this and it turns the voltage up, and it keeps turning it up and turning it up, and eventually you start cooking the edge connector on the PCB. Now, one way to fix this problem is to kind of bypass the edge connector. Let me show you an example here of a PCB. So here's a pole position PCB, and you can see here on the edge connector, see these traces are burnt up, and you'll see that the ground, this is the ground traces, they're all burnt up. So this game, and also usually the 5 volts too, but so basically it was just getting a bad connection. The voltage kept getting higher and higher, and it just kind of scorched these connectors here. So how do we, is this board right here, is this garbage? Do we just throw this board out? No, not at all. You can actually bypass these. See, what happens here is on this board there are different test points, and they're all labeled. So this one is labeled ground, and you look over here, we have a ground test point here. We've got 5 volts over here. So one thing that you can do is, as the edge connector is coming in, actually let me draw you a picture to kind of explain this whole idea. Okay, so basically what we have is a PCB right here, okay? And this is the edge connector on the PCB. Now, the PCB has various test points all over the board. So there might be a test point here that is +5. There might be a test point here that is ground. A test point over here that's +5. A test point over here that's ground, etc. Okay? And what's going to happen is we have our edge connector, that harness connector that connects onto the edge of the PCB. And that connector has various wires. Some of them are ground and 5 volts, and some are controls and all kinds of audio and all kinds of other stuff. So what we want to do basically is we want to bypass this edge connector. Now I'm just going to, just for instance, let's say this is a ground wire, and let's call this a +5. So what we want to do is we want to tap into this wire right here before the edge connector as it comes from the AR and run a jumper wire to the ground test point. And so essentially then we are bypassing this edge connector, which is scorched and burnt and just has a bad connection. And likewise with the +5, we want to tap into the +5 ahead of the edge connector on the PCB on the harness side, and then run a jumper wire to the +5 test point. Okay, now in theory that's all we really need to do. That's kind of like the mandatory steps for this mod, is jumping from the ground in the harness to the test point. And by the way, when you do this jump, you're going to use like a little quick connect, because these are little tabs. So you're going to run a wire from the ground before the harness, run it to the ground tab with a quick disconnect, and just plug it into the test point, likewise with the +5. So we could only do this and be done. Now I actually took it to the next step, and then what I did is I connected all of the test points together. That way I have just kind of better flow of the ground and +5 throughout the board, and we're not just solely relying on these 2 points right here. So then what you want to do, this is optional, but this is what I did, is then run a wire from this ground to all of the other ground points, and likewise with the +5, and we're going to run wires to all the different locations. And you know the test points go all the way back here. But anyway, this is the basic idea of this mod. So let me show you guys kind of like on the PCB then what we're going to do. So what we want to do, and by the way, there are 2 PCBs here, and it's important to treat them as separate PCBs because each one gets its own AR. So when we're doing the jumper connections over here, you got to make sure that this one goes to this board, and the +5 and the ground connections from this connection only go to this board. And likewise on the other side, when you're messing with the edge, the harness connector for this, the +5 and the ground that you're taking from this side only goes to this board. Okay, so what we have here then, there's a ground right here, and so we're gonna run a wire from this ground over to, let's see, there's a ground all the way back here. So why don't we get some wire and go ahead and do that. I'm gonna get some wire and my cutters and just kind of show you guys. I mean, this is pretty basic, this step. And like I said, this step is optional. Some people will say this is overkill to run wire across the whole board. But I did it anyway. It certainly doesn't hurt anything. So we're just gonna. Now you can get quick connectors to do this, or use wire, or just put the wire on here and then solder it, which is what I'm going to do. Alright, so I got a ground here, and if I look over here, there is another, let's see, 5 volts. Here's a ground right here. So I'm going to take my wire and I'm going to run it to right here. I'm going to cut it like so. And then I'm going to strip it. And this little tool rocks, Radio Shack. And then we're just going to kind of go through this hole here. Okay. Alright, so that's that. And let's see, there's a +5 all the way down here. So why don't we go ahead and run a +5 wire. And so we'll go ahead and strip that. And I'm going to connect it to the +5 that's right here. Okay, and there's a +5 all the way over here. It's actually right here on this side. So we're going to run it down to here. cut it. And it went flying across the room. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and strip it. Alright, so let's attach it to this +5. Alright, and that one goes over here. And like I said, you can use quick connectors for this because they like spade connectors, they perfectly go on there. Alright, so let's look around. There's a ground test spot right here. So why don't we jumper this ground to that ground. And I know some guys are going to tell me that this is totally unnecessary, this step. That you only really need to do the jumpers from the harness to the first test points. But you know what? My game, before I did this stuff, was completely flaky. It was completely unreliable. It was constantly locking up. I was getting garbage on the screen. So I completely believe in this mod. And also, I do want to stress one thing though. This mod is assuming that your AR power supplies are in good health. You know, if you have poor voltage altogether because the ARs, and there's 2 of them, are bad, then this mod's not going to do anything for you. So the first things first, before you do this mod, you really should rebuild and be positive that those power supplies are good. Because if they're not, like I said, this mod isn't going to do anything for you. Okay, so let's look around. I think on this side of the board, that is, oh, there's a +5 all the way down here. All right, so we're going to go ahead and run this +5 test point, run a wire to that other +5 test point. So let's strip our wire. And this is really pretty simple. But again, I really want to stress that you got to make sure your power supplies are actually good before you do this, because it is a requirement for this game to run properly. But you know, knocking on all kinds of wood here. My pole position has run reliably for about 2 years now, and the game really, knocking on wood again, never gives me any trouble ever. After I did this mod. Prior to this mod, I'd always have to go in there and reseat the edge connectors, and then it would start work. It would work okay for a couple weeks, or maybe even a week, and then I'd come down and there'd be garbage on the screen, or it wouldn't boot. The game would lock up, all kinds of madness like that. And then I did this mod, and it all stopped. But I had good AR power supplies going into this, so. Okay, so it looks there's a ground right here, so let's do that one. So we're gonna go from here to here, and I'm just putting the wires through the test points. The test points have holes in them. Okay, so looking at the board, on this side of the board, I have connected all of the ground to ground to ground to ground, and then all the +5 test points are now connected together. +5 to +5 to +5 to +5. And now we're going to do the same thing on the other side, and then we're going to solder the wires. Now, I'm not going to do the other side right now just for time considerations, but you guys kind of get the idea. But let's go ahead and solder these wires on now. So if you don't use spade connectors and you do it the way I'm doing it, then you should solder these wires to the test points afterwards. And if you've never soldered before, this actually it wouldn't be a bad one to try soldering on, because there's really nothing you can screw up here with these components. I'll probably do a how to solder video sometime soon. I'm gonna do like kind of like basic kind of stuff. I think I'll do a few of these, you know, how to use a multimeter, how to solder stuff, you know, maybe even in the coming week here. So you want to get yourself a good quality soldering iron if you've never soldered before. I mean, this is not going to be a how to solder tutorial, but you basically want to heat up the part, not the solder, and then apply the solder and let the part suck it up. Okay, so that connection there is good. And we'll go ahead and throw some solder over here. Like how that one looks. Okay, so you get the idea. So after you make all these connections, you want to solder them on, and then now we want to make our modifications at the harness. So let's go over to my game in the back, and I'll show you the modifications that I have already made. And by the way, yes, I only soldered these two. You want to solder all of them. I just did that for time consideration. So let's go to the back of the game, and I'll show you guys kind of the modifications that I made on the harness. Okay, here we are in the back of the game. One thing I want to note is that I keep the back door off of pole position, and I do that because this game is also known for its heat. Now, if you do have to keep the back door on, you might want to consider putting a fan like above the PCBs, kind of blowing onto them. I don't do that. Instead, I keep the back door open because I can, because of where the game is. I actually keep this game in a spot where I can get to it very easily without having to pull it from the wall, because a lot of my games, they're up against the wall, and if I want to get behind them, I need to pull them out. I've got this game actually situated in a spot where I can always just walk behind it because it's kind of up against these stairs, and right now we're under the stairs, so it's really easy for me to go and take a look at the game and just make adjustments and fix it if I need to, because I did have a lot of trouble in the beginning with this game, and then before I did these mods, and I was constantly back here making changes to it. Anyway, let me show you guys kind of the gist of what this game's all about in here. So there are two AR2 power supplies. There's one right there, and there's one right there. Now, each of those power supplies is supplying voltages to one of the boards. So there's two PCBs in this stack, and each one has its own AR2. And when we make our modifications, it's important that we stick when we cut into the wire here on the edge, on the harness for this board, the wires that we tap into have to go to the same board that the edge harness is connected into. You don't want to mix these voltages up between the two. So you can kind of see what I did and how I did it. So let me kind of pull this out. The game's on right now. So right here on this board at J19, we have our little harness connection to the edge connector on the PCB. Now, as the wires come in, just like the drawing I showed you guys before, I tapped into the wires, okay? And you can see this black one it's going to the ground test point here, and I have a little spade connector on there. And so I tapped into the wire right before it goes into the board, and then I ran a jumper wire, see this right here, black jumper wire, with a spade connector and connect it to the ground test point. And then you can then see my wire right here that continues on to the other connectors, just like we talked about before. And then here on the 5 volts, okay, and you should check your pinouts, but it looks like here on this side, this red and white is 5 volts, and this red and green is ground. But I really would like you to check the pinouts or the schematic just to verify that on your machine. So I tapped into the 5 volts right here before it enters the PCB, ran a jumper wire with a spade connector right to this test point right here. So now effectively we've got voltage entering the PCB 2 different ways. Still through the edge connector. You could actually clip this completely. I decided not to. I actually have redundant ways that voltage is getting to the board. The voltage is entering through here, and it's also entering the board through here to this test point with this jumper wire. Okay, so that's on the one PCB, and then on the other side, on the other PCB, we essentially did the same exact thing. Now let me try to get in here. A little cramped back here. Alright, so here we are. Same deal. You can see I've got the ground right here. This jumper wire, this black wire, is going to the harness here right before it goes into PCB. I tapped into it and ran a jumper wire to the ground. Again, on this side, red and green is ground, and then on this side, red and white is +5. Same thing, I tapped into the +5 and then ran a wire to the test connection. And again, you can see the wires continuing on with the 5 volts because of those extra wires I added connecting the test points on the PCB, just like we talked about before. So that's really the gist of the mod. It actually is very simple to do. And if you're having kind of reset issues or garbage, or you just kind of suspect it has something to do with that edge connector, or it's just kind of burnt up, you really do want to do this mod. I really do recommend it. And also, you got to make sure those power supplies are in good health to begin with. Otherwise, this mod isn't going to do anything for you. Alright, let's kind of go back. But anyway, guys, that's pretty much it. That is how I bulletproofed my pole position. You know, I hope you found that information useful. I'm going to be doing a bunch of tech videos, I think, in the next week during the holiday break. And so look out for them. And anyways, I'd like to thank you for subscribing to my channel. If you haven't yet, go ahead and click that subscribe button. This would be a great time to do it. Also, I do have a podcast that is broadcast live every Tuesday night at 9 p.m. Eastern at allgames.com. And of course, you can check out my podcast website at videogameoutsiders.com. Anyway, guys, game on, and we'll see you later.